Hello, this is Professor Neil Hamilton from the Drake University Agricultural Law Center. We're here today with another installment in our series, Law for Landowners, 10 Things You Should Know. Today our subject are women landowners and conservation, communication and concerns. Joining me is Anna Jordan Gray, who's been working at the center on this project. And Anna is going to provide a perspective on women landowners. Well, the first important point to recognize is that women have played a historically important role as landowners. Even though agriculture may be traditionally seen as a male-dominated, or to use the academic term, patriarchal system, it's important that we recognize that women have always owned land and, in fact, play important roles, both as farmers, but also as equal members of their families and in the family dynamics concerning their ownership of property. A second idea, though, is that I think we see evolving gender roles, and in fact, the role of women in agriculture and across society is becoming much larger and much more well recognized and acknowledged. Anna, do you see that issue of how gender roles are changing in people of your age and your families?
Absolutely. Women are becoming much more active in how the land is managed and how we think about agriculture and conservation. A third thing to understand is that there are many resources available to women. As more women become active in land management, this means that legal advisors, government programs, and organizations need to be more mindful of how they can adapt their programs to fit the needs of women. Fortunately, organizations such as the Women Food and Agriculture Network and Iowa Women in Agriculture have put together resources, workshops, and conferences to help women manage their land and understand their options.
How important do you think it is, and I think our fourth point is the idea of asking questions and getting information. Do you see that as something that women landowners are comfortable with?
I think women landowners tend not to be as comfortable as they should be with asking questions. A lot of times you're working with farm managers or tenants who have been farming or owning land for a long time, who seem really confident in everything that there is to know about owning land. However, you should never be shy about asking questions because you're going to learn from the answers and you're going to become a more confident and responsible landowner.
A fifth idea here, I think, really is this whole question of communication. And that part of the value of both asking those questions and getting those answers is that ability to communicate your desires. How important do you think that is in this context of dealing with women landowners and women kind of taking the ownership role that they have with their property?
It's incredibly important to share your desires and ideas with those that are affected by your decisions. By communicating with those around you, whether it be a spouse, a child, or a tenant, you can be clear as to what your plans are for the property. You can also get their feedback and reactions to your ideas.
I suppose it also helps prevent or
Conflicts
surprises and conflicts when
yes.
there are people that may not feel the same way about what we should do with the property. But that relates really to the sixth point, and that is the need to recognize that the landowner's in control. Whether you're a male or a female, if you're the owner, you're in control. I can tell you over the years as a professor, I've received any number of calls that typically go like this. My sister and I have recently inherited a farm from our parents, and we have some ideas about the future, and we're concerned how the tenant is farming the land. And we wonder whether it would be okay if we actually make these suggestions to the tenant. I'm always surprised by that question because the answer is, well, as the owner, of course you have the right to talk to the tenant, to make suggestions, and to make changes. But I also realize that this is perhaps easier than it sounds. Because of the typical kind of male domination, it may well be common for the farmer, the tenant, oftentimes a man, to feel like they have the answers. And for a new landowner, for example, these sisters that have just come into ownership, to be uncertain about what they know and what they should ask. But the key is, if you're the landowner, you're in control. You have the right to have your questions answered, and ultimately, you have the right to determine how the property is used, and that means who it is that's using it. The seventh idea to recognize is that in many ways, this communication and these questions are really about respect. And respect is a two-way street. But if you're a woman landowner, you need to recognize the idea of your control and that you have the right both to ask questions and to be respected in these conversations, because ultimately you're the decision maker. So it's important to get information, to seek advice when you don't know what you want to do. But people need to also acknowledge and respect your role as the owner and the decision maker.
An eighth point to recognize is that each landowner is an individual. While historically men have dominated the agricultural sector, that doesn't mean that women haven't been given an equal voice and opportunity within their own families and marriages.
The important point to remember, and the purpose of this video, is thinking about the key issues that may come up when you're dealing with gender questions of ownership and decision making. At the end of the day, as landowners, we all have the ability to leave our mark on the property. This leads us to our ninth point, and that is, as a landowner, you have the ability to turn your vision into actions. If you have definite ideas for how your land should be farmed, the length of the farm lease that you want, the crops that you want to see planted, the prairie you want to see restored, then you have the autonomy and the ability to make those decisions happen. Of course, economics are important, but as we all know, economics aren't everything. We don't add up a tally sheet to decide whether or not we love our children, and we also don't only count economics when it comes to our relationship to the land. As a landowner, the opportunity to turn your vision, your dreams into reality can be one of the most satisfying components of that important role. Well, a 10th and final point for landowners of all genders is to seek out professional advice when you feel that you need it. And perhaps even when you don't feel you need it, it might come in most handy. So, if you're dealing with a potential sale of a property or acquisition of another piece of property, you have a question such as drainage, fence law, or any of the many legal issues that we've covered in this series, being able to seek out and obtain professional advice can be very valuable. When it comes to the gender issues, as we've talked about with this episode, it's important to recognize that the people you're dealing with recognize your role and validate your role as the owner and the decision maker. And if you feel that you're not being respected, it might be worth mentioning it. And if that doesn't give you satisfaction, you might want to consider seeking out advisors who do respect you for your role, both as a woman and as a landowner. Well, this is Professor Neil Hamilton for Drake University and my colleague,
Anna Gray.
We want to thank you for watching today's episode of Law for Landowners, 10 Things You Should Know, dealing with issues of gender and representing women landowners.